Sorry, that was me. I turned on my mic too early. All right, there we go. Can you hear me? Good, good. Okay, so I want to start off with a non-controversial statement. Sometimes as a speaker, you start out with something really controversial and it gets everybody all riled up, and then you kind of back off from it later. You know, you heard me speak, right? So I want to start with something that I believe we will get general consensus on. Okay, you ready? Okay, here it is. I believe that you and I make our legacy not in the things of our life, the things that we own or possess or do, but in the lives of people, right? Who would agree with that? I mean, generally, that's the way it is. It is in your children, the time that you pour into those kids' lives, and even though they're annoying and in junior high, you love them and you hang out with them and you pour into them, right? Or even at work, work is important and it's good, and you guys are very motivated and driven people, but it's the people in your work that you pour into. Or maybe you teach Sunday school, or maybe you work with Oasis, but it's those people, relationships, not things. It's not, what car you own or what career that you end up, or how many magazines you end up getting into because of your career. It's not how you dress. It's not how many homes you decorate or redecorate. Those don't matter. Those are simply things, right? Now, I will tell you though, there are some exceptions to the rule. There are certain people that have lived their lives and they have made their reputation. In fact, they've made their entire legacy through things. Let me give you a couple examples. Whose legacy is this? Somebody tell me. That's right. Can you say it? Pablo Picasso. That is how he made his reputation. Now, we know him by his pictures. His subjects never got famous because, they don't walk around looking like that. It looks nothing like them. But Pablo Picasso became famous. In fact, I think we have a picture of Pablo right there. There he is. Although I don't think it's fair. He painted all those people look like that to have him show this picture. So let's show this one, all right? That's more like it, right? If you're going to paint everybody to look like that, you should look like that. If you look on Google, the most popular, most famous artist in the 20th century, it is Pablo Picasso. So he would be one exception, because he has made his legacy with a thing or something that he has done. Let me give you another person. Whose legacy does this represent? All right? Henry Ford, that's right. What color is that car? It's black and white photo. Are you sure it's not dark blue? Do you know how we're sure it's not dark blue? Because Henry Ford famously once said, you can have a Model T in any color as long as it's black. It's hard to think of a car maker or a single name that is more famous in the 20th century than Henry Ford was. And certainly you look at that product and you see that name, even on cars today, you think of that one person. So he clearly made his legacy with his thing. Okay, this is the final Jeopardy question. I had one person that knew it first service. Here we go. Whose legacy is this? We got a couple. Frank Lloyd Wright. You win. You get to give the rest of the message. All right? That's Frank Lloyd Wright. This is the Guggenheim in New York, and he is an architect, and he designed this building. He spent his whole life designing this building. His legacy is made in the buildings that he has made. And I think he knew that. He once said this: a doctor can bury his mistakes, but an architect can only advise his clients to plant vines. This is a great line. I mean, there are some people that make their legacy by what they do. Something famous that they've done. They can be remembered like that. But the reality is, probably not you and me. We're going to do it in the lives of people. We're going to do it in the lives of the people that we love. We're going to be out in our neighborhoods, and that's where we will leave our legacy. We'll be in our work, and you think that your job is about accounting. It is not about accounting. It's about the people in your office and the people that you will reach and the people that come into your office and caring for them, because that is how you will make your legacy. Now, I think we all agree with that. There's not a single person, if we're sitting across Starbucks, that would disagree with that. Now, here's the ironic thing. When you take the amount of time that you and I spend looking for things, wanting things, in comparison to what we really think builds legacy, seems like maybe We don't practice what we preach, do we? Just think about this for a second. How much time do you spend at work? And you are focused on that work, and you are focused on your career, and you are focused on that one thing that will get everybody to notice that you are successful. Or how much time do we spend decorating or redecorating in a home, so hoping that when people look at that thing, that their opinion of us will change? Or how much time do you consider the car that you buy, or the clothes that you wear, or the makeup that you wear? Think about how much time we consider the devices that we hold in our hands, or that we work with at work. We cannot put our devices down. We spend so much time with those devices. They are things. In fact, when you take the idea that we want our legacy to be in the lives of people, and we spend so much time hunting down things, I think it would be, I don't think it would be too crazy to say, I don't know if there's an area in our lives that we are more hypocritical than this one. Now, I said that to a couple staff people, and I said, hey, do you think I overstated that? And Jonathan said, well, you know, I would kind of like to debate you on that one. So maybe who thinks I overstated it? Who pretty much thinks I overstate everything, right? It's kind of my job. Maybe it's overstated. But at least, maybe it's time to do some self-evaluation based on how much you spend your time on and what you spend your time on. Is it feeding into this idea that you know that you will leave your legacy in the lives of people? We're going to look at that today. In fact, this is a very personal message for me. It's something that I have been in the middle of self-evaluating myself, and you're going to see that in just a few minutes. But before we get started, why don't you do me a favor? Would you bow your head? We'll just take maybe 30 seconds, maybe 45 seconds to give you an opportunity to pray. For some of you, this is the only quiet that you'll get this week. Just ask God, maybe ask God a simple question like, God, speak to me, or God, help me to do some self-evaluation. Maybe you want to ask this question, God, help me to not just say I value people, but help me to live that. Let's take some time to pray. Lord God, I pray that you'd speak to us today, that you'd help us to listen to you. You go beyond my words, that we focus on what you have to say to us in this moment. We love you, Jesus, in your name. Amen. So today we are continuing the series on David, and as we do, we're going to find that David found himself in the same place of self-evaluation that you and I need to find ourselves in today. If you have your Bible, open up to 2 Samuel verse 7. We've been doing a lot of verses on the screen because there's a lot of verses that we have to cover, but please do me the favor. Bring your Bible, bring a pen, bring a highlighter. That way this book goes beyond. I mean, I realize if you bring it now, you can't read it because we painted everything. But still, bring it, and that way that book can become a useful tool later throughout the week. So, 2 Samuel chapter 7. David's at a pretty good place in his life. And he's doing a little self-evaluation. Verse 1, this is what it says. After the king was settled in his palace, and the Lord had given him rest from all his enemies around him. So he'd pretty much been at war with everybody around him, Philistines, and Amorites, and all those people. And now there's peace. And as he's sitting there in this peaceful house, he said to Nathan the prophet, "Here I am, living in a house made of cedar, while the ark of God remains in a tent." So Nathan replied to the king, "Hey, whatever you have in mind, go ahead and do it, for the Lord is with you." At this point in David's life, David has got it going on, man. He is succeeding in everything. He's winning all the wars. Everybody likes him. Nobody wants to play him in ping pong. I mean, he's awesome at everything. And so Nathan says, you know what? You want to build a house for God? I don't see what is stopping you. But he spoke too soon. Look with me in the next verse. That night the word of the Lord came to Nathan, saying, go and tell my servant David, this is what the Lord says. Are you the one to build me a house to dwell in? I have not dwelt in a house from the day I brought the Israelites up out of Egypt to this day. I have been moving from place to place with a tent as my dwelling. Whenever I have moved with all the Israelites, did I ever say to any of the rulers who I commanded to shepherd my people Israel, why have you not built me a house of cedar? God's basically saying, I don't need your house. Why do you think you're going to be the one to build me a house? In verse 12, when your days are over and you rest with your ancestors, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, your own flesh and blood, and I will establish his kingdom. He is the one who will build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of its kingdom forever. Now, I want you to notice there's a couple of things going on here, because this is talking about the next generation, but it is also talking about future generations in which Jesus will be the king that will establish his kingdom forever. But he is also talking about David and his son Solomon, because it's Solomon who's going to be the one that builds the temple. Now, a couple questions that pop into my mind. All right? David wants to build a temple for God. Why can't he do it? One, did God say no because it's a bad idea? If it's such a bad idea, why does his son Solomon get to do it? And secondly, did God say no because David had done something wrong, because there was sin in his life? Again, as I read this, that's not what I'm seeing. Here's the scene as I see it. David is sitting in his house made out of cedar. He's in his favorite lazy boy made out of goat hair. And he's looking out, and there's the Ark of the Covenant, and it's in a Coleman 8-person dome tent. And he said, this just isn't right. I'm living in Rancho Santa Fe, and check that out. This isn't right. And yet, God turns to him and says, great idea, but that will not be your job to do. I got something else for you. But that ain't it. I don't think it was because David had a bad idea. I don't think it was because he had bad motives. I just think God said no. Now let's get back to our legacy talk for a second. There's a couple of points I want to make about legacy, and the first one is this. Just because you don't get something you asked for doesn't mean you did anything wrong. I mean, there are times that there are things that we ask for. We're just not going to get them. Man, if I could only get that job, you don't get it. If I could only get that promotion, it goes to somebody else. If I get into that college, you don't get into that college. If I could date that guy, and he dates the cocktail waitress. If I could marry that woman, and she marries somebody else. If I could get in that house, but the realtor gives it to somebody else. If I could do this, if I could do that, if I could be the starter. Why? Maybe it's because I've made a mistake. Maybe it's because I've sinned. Maybe, there's something wrong with me, that God doesn't want me to have this thing. And I just need you to know that it may not be because you did anything wrong. It just may be not within God's plan. I don't think he's being kept from the temple because of his sin. There is a moment where we get a little more insight on why David wasn't able to build this temple. We see this in 1 Chronicles 22. It says this, David is not dying, but he's near the end of his life. He pulls his son Solomon over. He called his son Solomon. He charged him to build a house for the Lord, the God of Israel. David said to Solomon, my son, I had it in my heart to build a house in the name of the Lord my God. But this word of the Lord came to me, and here we have it. Okay, you ready? This is what God said. You have shed much blood and have fought many wars. You are not to build a house for my name, because you have shed much blood on the earth and in my sight. But you will have a son who will be a man of peace and rest, and I will give him rest from all his enemies on every side. His name will be Solomon, and I will grant him Israel peace and quiet during his reign. He is the one who's going to build a house for my name. Now, so why can't he build a house? Because he's been in a lot of battles. Well, that feels like sin to me. How about you? Here's the only problem I have with it. God told him to do that. God told him to be at war. He told him to defend Israel. He told him to push his enemies back. So I don't think it's his sin. It's just God said no to him. Just because you don't get something doesn't mean that you did something wrong. It could, though. I have to tell you, it could mean that you did something wrong. Because there are times, like Moses doesn't get to the promised land because he's got an anger issue. Earlier on in this story, Saul doesn't get to keep being king because he has an obedience issue. I mean, sometimes that happens. And this is the category I'd put it in. It's not that you made a mistake and God is waiting to squash you. What I believe, and this is just my belief, is that most of the time we are punished by our sin, not for our sin. Does that make sense to you? So like we're punished by the dumb things that we do. And if you hurt people and you yell at people, they're ultimately not going to want to be near you. You're going to have bad relationships. You can be punished by that mistake. It's not God trying to crush you. It's just that you made those mistakes, and so you'll be punished. You lie a lot, and so people don't trust you anymore. They don't want to be near you. You lose friendships. You're punished by that sin, not for that sin. But in this particular case, I don't think that's what's going on. Look at Psalm 130. I think I just have it, so I'm going to read it to you. God says this, "If you, Lord, kept a record of sins, Lord, who could stand?" I mean, really, if you just have to do good things so that God will be nice to you, when is God ever going to be nice to you? Because we have so many things. I'm not sure those things are always connected. Now, this story became very personal to me this last week, and it has been for years. I've gone back to this story. Who do you know that has been trying forever to get a building for God? Do you know anybody like that? 20 years, man. 20 years of going out with realtors. 20 years of, hey, check this out. 20 years of, man, that would work perfectly, but they don't want us. I remember there's one specific building that we were focused on. And I'll tell you where it is, okay? So you go Trader Joe's and Chuck E. Cheese, Jerome's, and then there are 3 buildings. One's this giant mirrored building, and then there are 2 other buildings. And there was one building there that would have been perfect. We talked to the ownership. Seemed like things might work out. We did an architectural rendering of how beautiful it would be. Well, they ended up not really saying anything to us until they finally sold that building. And the next organization took that building, it was my dream building, and they plowed it under and made it into a parking lot. People are parking on my building. Now, you probably are asking yourselves, what sin did Jack commit so that we don't have this building? You know what the answer is? Millions of them. That is funny. For you, you're not on stage. Man, I've had this conversation with God so many times. You know what I wanted when I came to Canyon Springs? When we moved in, here's what I wanted. I wanted us to move in, get a nice, really big building, grow really big, so that all I had to do was hang out in the green room, having a water and a donut, come out, speak, be done, and go back to the green room. That's what I wanted. And all you'd see of me is when I was on stage, and you'd like that, because you wouldn't see all the other things about me. And that was kind of my life when I was a camp speaker. But you know what God wanted for me? He didn't want me to be a speaker. He wanted me to be a pastor. He wanted me to know the people at my church. Let me give you one of the highlights of my last month. It's going to seem like the dorkiest highlight, but I'm going to tell it to you. So Oasis does this houseboat trip, and I've never been. I have a 17-year-old daughter. She has never invited me to go with her on this houseboat trip. But beforehand, Chad always wants me to go. He wants me to show up early and pray for the event. I mean, really seriously, Chad, I need to be there at 6:30 for 20 seconds of prayer. I can't mail that in. Can I pre-record it? So I show up early, and I'm wandering through all these kids who are about ready to go to houseboats. And as I walk through, I'm getting, hey, Pastor Jack, how you doing, Pastor Jack? Pat on the back, hugs. I know so many of those Oasis kids. So many of them have been in my house. So many of them have eaten my food. And I'm pointing to you two girls right there. Because I'm not just a speaker. God didn't just want us to build a facility so that the programming could be beautiful. He wanted us to build a community. That's what you are. Now, I'm not saying we've stopped looking. We're never going to stop looking. In fact, here's the plan. We have a lawyer who has just given his time pro bono, and it's the number one law firm in the United States, Latham and Watkins. Unless that's not your law firm, then they're second to yours. And he said he would give his time, but our problem is you can't just show up at a place because Scripps Ranch, the 92131, has rezoned. There used to be this amount of property that you could use for a church, and now they've said no property can be used as a church. Do you know how churches are zoned in San Diego? You know, we're zoned exactly the same way as strip clubs. You know that? Yay! So we need to have a lawyer fight that battle. So we either need to find an owner who has a building that is sympathetic to us, or we need to find a building that people are going to move out in a year so we can start the legal battle now and get in when we need to get in. So that's your job. Find me my building. Yeah, that's my plan. Yeah, what does God say when we show him our plans? Right? It just laughs. Look, David thought that his big plan was going to be if I build this building. And I don't think that he had his thoughts were bad when he did it. But God said no. And sometimes God says no to us. It's not because you're a bad person. It's because he has a different plan. Anyway, that's my story, and that's what I'm sticking with. Let me give you a second lesson. I think this is maybe the most important. Your greatest success may not be what you accomplish, but what you pass on to the next generation. David was not able to build that temple, but man, he was going to get his son Solomon ready to build it. 1 Chronicles 22, again, near the end of David's life, David gave orders to assemble the foreigners residing in Israel, and from among them he appointed stone cutters to prepare dressed stone for building the house of God. He provided a large amount of iron to make nails for the doors of the gateways and the fittings, and more bronze that could be weighed. He also provided more cedar logs that could be counted. He brought them large sums to David. David said, "My son Solomon is young and inexperienced, and the house to be built for the Lord should be of great magnificence and fame and splendor in the sight of the nations. Therefore, I will make preparations for it." So David made extensive preparations before his death. David couldn't build it, so he set up his son for success. And maybe that needs to be the shift in our motivation. Rather than doing all these things so you'll notice me, building my building so you'll notice me, getting my career so you'll notice me, getting enough money and cars and clothes and better makeup and in better shape so that you notice me. Maybe our focus needs to be on raising up the next generation. Because you just said it. That's our legacy. We need to shift. That's what David did. Pray for your kids. Put down your phone and get on the ground with your children. Be involved in their life as long as they will let you. You know, I've got a group of people that go over and teach Sunday school. Do you know that we have a group of people that have dedicated themselves to teach for 9 months without missing Sundays? Every Sunday they went. It's not just once a month. To pour their life. That's legacy. Working with junior and high school kids. Pouring into their lives. Maybe at your work, it's not about what you're accomplishing. Maybe there's somebody at your office that is younger and up and coming that you can pour your life into. That's where our legacy is made. You know, I've said this so many times, but I think it bears repeating. Some of you grew up in difficult family situations. Your dad drank and your parents were distant. They got divorced. They didn't like you. They didn't want to spend any time with you. They never were involved in your life. Listen, if all you do with your life is break that legacy, trade the legacy of dysfunction for function. Trade the legacy of distance for being close to your family. If all you do is trade that legacy in your lifetime, your life is an unqualified success. As you pour into the legacy of children that are going to follow you. But we got to shift our attitudes. Like maybe it isn't your dream that will be fulfilled. Maybe your dream will be fulfilled in the life of somebody else. Now, I am living out somebody else's dream. My dad became a Christian when I was about junior high, and he wanted to be a pastor so bad. He went to seminary. He collected all of these books. He just had books and books and books. I remember so many times my dad just sitting and journaling all the things. He loved to study God's Word. Just poured his time and attention to it. Wanted to be a pastor. But never made it. Couple reasons. First is he didn't like people. It's kind of occupational hazard, right? I mean, if he could have ministered to dogs, unbelievable ministry. And he just really just got too old and sick to be able to do that. So his son lived out his dream. I remember speaking at a camp, and I was given my message, and there was my dad, and I could see his just tears rolling down his face as I was living out his dream. Now, every book that I own has this insignia on it. I want to show it to you. I think I have it up here. It's a little hard to read, but it says Library of Jack Hawkins. Every book that I have, it's a stamp that I put in all of my books, and I still have it. But it says JWH. My dad's name is Jack Wayne Hawkins. Mine is Jack Douglas Hawkins. I remember the day that my dad got that stamp. He pulled me into his office. He says, I got this stamp, but I put JWH in the middle, and here's why. Because every time you pick up one of these books that I'm now collecting for you, I want you to remember them. My office is filled with those books so that I can live out some of these dreams. You know, we don't have a building. Did you notice? Dad wouldn't care. He would love you. He would love this church. Sometimes it's not about your dream. Sometimes it's about helping somebody else live theirs. You know, there's lots of ways to make legacy. You can make a legacy with the paintings that you paint and the cars that you create and the amazing architecture throughout the world. You could do that. But let's make our legacy in the lives of people around us. So just out of curiosity, I was writing my message on Monday morning, and I thought of these three people that I wanted to highlight because as I look at their life, they're super famous and they are exceptions to the rule. So I decided I was going to look them up on Monday night. My daughter's in hip-hop, and I'm sitting in my car and go, I wonder if these guys had a legacy with people like they had with their buildings, or with their cars, or with their paintings. Let me show you what I found out. First article I read about, Pablo Picasso said this: women are machines for suffering, Picasso told his mistress, Françoise Gillot, in 1943. Indeed, as they embarked on their 9-year affair, the 61-year-old artist warned the 21-year-old student, for me, there are only two kinds of women, goddesses and doormats. Of the 7 most important women in Picasso's life, 2 killed themselves, 2 went mad, another died of natural causes only 4 years into their relationship. Picasso had affairs with dozens, perhaps hundreds of women, and was true to none of them. Now, I didn't read long enough to get any information about his children, but how could you possibly ever have a relationship with your children with that legacy? Okay, so that's Pablo Picasso. Henry Ford. A couple moments really stood out as I was studying Henry Ford. Do you know that Henry Ford had a newspaper called the Dearborn Independent? There are so many anti-Semitic articles in the Dearborn Independent that Theodor Frisch, who's a member of the Reichstag in Nazi Germany, had them compiled, and he called the book The International Jew, the World's Foremost Problem. Henry Ford was the president of Ford until he was overthrown by his daughter-in-law, who put her son in power. Frank Lloyd Wright had 6 children with his wife, Catherine, but he left her to care for them. He was described as non-parental. How many of you ever feel like that? Sometimes, right? Hopefully not to this extent. In 1903, Wright designed a house for Edwin Cheney and immediately took a liking to Cheney's wife, and her name was Mama. Years later, Wright and Mama met up in Europe, leaving their spouses and their children behind. He then left Europe to go to Chicago to help build a building. And while he was there, one of the workers at his house killed 7 people in his house, including Mama. Wright married again to Miriam Noel, but her addiction to morphine led to divorce in less than a year. Lots of ways you can leave a legacy, people. You can leave it in paintings or cars or buildings. Let's choose people. Do me a favor, would you bow your head? Why don't I just give you a moment? You pray this in the quietness of your own heart. Say, God, teach me what it will take to leave a legacy in the lives of the people around me. Lord God, I pray that you would go before us. I pray that you would help us to do a little self-evaluation this week. And I pray, God, that this place would be filled with people that make a difference in the lives of people. In your name we pray. Amen.